Yeah, hey Hivers. Welcome back to another Buzzin episode. My name is Lester Casiano.
And I'm Isabella Calisi, and we're your hosts for today. We're talking about bees. Love bees.
Buzz.
So today the episode is What's the Buzz with Backyard Beekeeping? And the thing that we're kind of discussing today is how urban beekeeping can possibly have an impact on local pollinators. To discuss this question of if urban beekeeping does have an effect on local populations and local pollinators, which don't always include bees, like, there's butterflies, the wind, there's lots of different pollinators around. But like urban beekeeping kind of usually has to do with honeybees and like sometimes mason bees, all that kind of capacity. And you have lots of supplies and you have to like get this all from somewhere. So I went to BC Bee Supplies up on Hastings Street, North Burnaby here, and talked to one of the owners, Winston Wong, on kind of his opinions on the subject. So I guess we'll kind of like take you there now.
These are smokers. So, did Winston tell you anything about smokers or like any of the equipment?
No.
No. Okay. So when we go into the hive, we're disturbing the bees, obviously, and they think we're a predator, kind of like a bear trying to steal the honey. So we use smoke with a smoker to try to mask our scent, and it also makes the bees believe that the hive is on fire. So they'll go into the hive, and they'll start collecting honey to leave the hive with to create a new hive that's not on fire. So we put burlap into the smoker, and then we smoke the hive.
This is Anya Soroka. She works at the shop just for general tidying and cleanup and assistance to Winston. She showed me around the shop and the different types of tools that you use for beekeeping.
There's different equipment for uncapping. There's knives, there's forks, and this is a roller. It happens that there's something wrong with the queen, or you want to split the hive and you need a new queen, and so there are people in the business of rearing queens. And this is all the equipment that we have to help with that, and these are queen...
You're doing great.
Oh, these are queen cells? I'm gonna go ask Winston.
Winston is one of the owners. Him and his wife, Ninny, run the shop, but I think Winston's more in charge of, like, the beekeeping downstairs.
Here is this guy in a bee suit on this garden tour spinning honey. And we're like, what is this now? Because we were just interested in the garden stuff. Because we were just starting one on our own. And we basically spent the rest of the day with him, helping him extract honey.
The shop is for local beekeeping enthusiasts, everything on, like, the smaller scale. They supply them with a mix of tools and care supplies and order stuff like colonies for people or queens if they need one to refix their hive.
So we got started about 12 years ago, so 2012-ish. We opened a beekeeping supply shop in 2017. So we were beekeepers for a number of years, and now we're encouraging other people to do the same. I guess there's interest for the scientists, there's interest for the environmentalists, there's interest for the gardener, there's interest for anyone interested in creepy crawly things that fly. So all of that, there's a lot of appeal for bees, and thus a lot of appeal for beekeeping.
Some other facts about bees. So in BC, the number of beekeepers went from 2,793 in 2019 to 4,911 in 2023, and that's the registered amount that we can find. Yeah, I found it was an interesting fact that there's that many, like, at least registered beekeepers in BC. What did you think?
Yeah, it's great. Great to know. Like, I think that's important to know. And, like, for the beekeepers, it's very important to register, of course. And great to see that they're, like, all around everywhere. So, like, if anyone wants to start beekeeping, they're like, hey, there's actually a lot of people doing this. So they have their own support.
That has a sharp edge and a hooked end on the other side. You can choose which side to use, and you just scrape it or wedge it in between the frames.
Almost what our whole business is built around are local bee populations. Now, when I say local, I don't mean local honeybees, because none of the honeybees are local to North America. They're all brought in at some point. But there are enough farmers of bees, keepers of colonies, that have a surplus in the spring. So we have nucleus colonies, nuke colonies is what we call them, and they are partial colonies that have a queen, a number of frames of bees with some honey and pollen in them. And then that is sold as a bundle that allows people to take them from our shop and put the bees into their own hives. Basically, without a queen, a colony's future is less likely to be sustained. So by bringing in queens or rearing queens, raising queens, we can help beekeepers keep their hives going if there's a problem with any of the leadership in the colonies.
But one of the interesting things that I found when we kind of started looking into this is that apparently a lot of Canadians and a lot of Canadian like bee, honey farmers, whatever it is, where people kind of get like their colonies and their queen bees from in Canada is from overseas. So they get stuff from like Chile, Australia, and that's because like their bees are kind of dying off during like the winter, or there's been a large infestation of like mites and things, so they keep kind of dying off, and the weather's been getting harsher, and that's been kind of harder on these commercial kind of bee suppliers, as well as I guess like variety and things. But I don't know, I didn't realize that. How about you?
No, I didn't realize that at all. It's crazy, like, to think about, like, there's the little bees traveling in, like, those little cases. United States, not that far, but Chile, that's over at least one continent as well. It's a long journey.
Over the last 5 years, right, these are the 5 years of the pandemic, there have been people interested in producing their own honey, trying a new experience. They may have heard that bees are dying worldwide and want to make a difference. So there's lots of reasons to enter beekeeping, but as life returns to a 2019 normal, where people are very busy, their time isn't as available, we are actually down compared to those years. But I'm hoping that beekeeping still remains popular for the upcoming future.
So that's Winston. That's BC Bee Suppliers. I don't know. I think it's fun. I think that's cool. I'm glad people have a fun little hobby that they're able to go to. So who did you get into? Who did you talk to?
So I was able to reach out with Melissa Platsko, who actually studies pollinator science at the University of British Columbia. Talk about bees. It's a nice conversation, like we mentioned it earlier. Just people who like bees are just very interesting to talk to. Yeah, and she was amongst the group.
Well, I'm curious to hear what she has to say, especially because she has a master's in it. So I didn't really realize people could like master in essentially bee studies, and I think that must be like really fun to kind of go and dig into.
Oh yeah, a lot of things out there.
So here in BC, we have a lot of different bee species. BC itself has about 600 different bee species. In Vancouver, you will commonly see bumblebees. We have quite a few species we see here commonly, such as Bombus mixtus, which is the mixed bumblebee. It's a bumblebee with an orange bum. You will also commonly see small bees here. See a lot of our mining bees. So these are bees that kind of nest in the ground. Because they're smaller, they typically forage in and around that area that they nest. We also see cavity nesters. So things like leafcutter bees will nest in cavities of wood or even in underground cavities. And we will also see like mason bees, like osmia.
That's a lot of bees. That's like 600. That's a lot of bees.
That is, yeah. I can only name like 3 or 4 types, and the fact that there's like hundreds of different more, that's crazy.
I don't know. No, I didn't realize there was that many species. Like, I guess it makes sense. There's like so many types of like trees, for instance. But for like bees, they're just such small little guys. I think in my head, I was just like, oh, it's a bee. That's a fat bee. That's a fuzzy bee. But like, I don't think like that one's a mason. That one's a leafcutter or anything of like that kind of jangle.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually. Like, when you see a bee, it's like, oh, it's kind of like when you see like a dog. You're just like, oh, that's a dog. But it could be like a chihuahua or like a greyhound. And it's actually the same thing with bees, which is really cool.
So there's a couple different ways that backyard bees, more so honeybees, can impact native bees. There's a possibility for competition with native bees for nectar and pollen, especially in urban landscapes where some of these gardens and flowering areas can be fragmented or very small. There's an increased likelihood of pathogen transmission from managed honeybees into native bee communities. Several studies have seen that some diseases can pass from managed honeybees into bumblebees as well as other native bees. And then kind of finally, this is less for our native bees, more for our plant communities, but honeybees can change the composition of wild plant communities. by providing resources for honeybees and deterring native bees from foraging there. Essentially, a selective pressure towards catering to bumblebees in natural areas or native plant communities.
But yeah, I didn't really realize that about that they could change the composition that much of like the environment around them. That's pretty powerful for just a small little pollinator.
Yeah, it's great. And like, that this section of the conversation was awesome. So just really know a lot about it. And like, yeah, I learned a lot about it as well, like how much it impacts like the resources they do and like the work it kind of does, They're quite little guys, so of course it goes like uncharted. So really cool to know about and to have to think about.
It makes me think of, because it does make sense. It's like when you have like a lot of humans and like an area and there's like a patch of grass there, but if enough people like walk over it, then it's gonna get changed, and then that changes the environment around you. So it makes sense. It's just I didn't realize that it impacted it that much.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't either. It's just like so cool how much work they do. Just like they have their own little lives, just like humans.
And the bees don't like being exposed, so we keep these panels covering the glass until we want to see the bees, at which point we remove the panels and we can observe the bees.
So, conflicts with native pollinators is not really our issue. We just hope that of the people that choose to have colony-driven bees on their property, that they have enough education and experience to arm themselves with so that they can effectively beekeep according to their goals. But even if you're not willing to get stung throughout the year, not willing to take any honey from the honeybees, you can still participate in the love of the bee by planting pollinator flowers. Any nectar-rich flower will do. Nursing and keeping good trees is another way to help your local beekeeper, even buying local honey. I mean, that is a way to benefit yourself and beekeepers down the road. Lots of ways to participate, even if you're not a beekeeper. So we love everybody.
The best way to support local bees is to support diverse plantings of native plants, plant them in your garden, support them in your parks and community gardens, as well as to just spend some time either taking a pollinator walk or looking online at wild pollinator resources and just learning a bit about the bees that live around you. All these native bees get overlooked, and it's hard to implement conservation measures when people aren't even aware these bees exist. To look into wild bees, the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation is a great resource. And my website, of course. Get curious, start learning about wild bees. Yeah.
I think that's really nice. I think it's nice how kind of like both unanimously kind of like think the same, like Winston and Melissa, I mean. I think it's interesting how both of them have like a similar reaction of like, do your research and, figure out what's around you. And I think honestly, that kind of seems like the best way to like go about this entire thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's great to see they're kind of like, even though they're both from like different kind of like communities or different opinions, they're still kind of to spread the same message, even though the message is slightly different. And just overall looking out, they want to keep their what they do safe and fun.
Did you think that when we start the school year here that you would be learning so extensively on like bee colonies in Canada?
I did not actually, but I'm kind of excited that I got to do this and happy I got to do this.
Nice. Well, thanks for tuning in, listeners. This has been The Hive, and we're your hosts. I'm Isabel Calisi.
I'm Melissa Cusano.
And we'll see you guys next time. This episode was produced and edited by Isabel Calisi and produced by Alessio Cusano. All of our fun facts about bees came from Statistics Canada in their 2023 report. Our intro and outro music is by Colix, and we'd like to thank our guests Melissa Platsko, Winston Wan, and Anya Soroka for joining us this week as we discussed bees.
What do you collect?
I collect shoes,
K-pop albums,
rocks and crystals,
Pokemon cards, money, sports trading cards,
photo cards.
I collect jewelry from different countries I visited and from thrift stores.
Welcome back to Agree to Disagree.
This is the Cheeky Collector's Guide.
So, Lauren, do you collect anything?
I don't collect anything at the moment, but I used to collect those little Disney plushies. I think they were called Tsum Tsums. I used to have so many of them. Unfortunately, my parents gave them away. I think I grew out of them, according to them. But how about you, Tammy?
Well, I have always been a Sanrio girly. I had a very modest collection of mostly Hello Kitty items when I was a kid. Obviously your parents aren't buying you toys every day.
Yeah.
But now that I'm older, I have access to adult money, I've added a couple things to that collection.
Yeah, absolutely. And collecting is such a big thing right now, and it has been for quite some time. You can collect Funko Pops, vintage art, vinyls, there's a whole range of things to collect. It's an endless world of collecting.
Yeah, and there's some real value that can be generated from these collections, especially if you manage to get your hands on something that was maybe owned by a celebrity or something that was limited edition or even first edition. There's some real big money in these collections.
Totally.
Aw, new Charizard card. Cool.
New Gym Challenge game cards.
Can G.I. Joe stop the Crimson Guard? Find out in Marvel Comics.
And that was from the Pokemon Gym Challenge card set commercial from 1999 and the G.I. Joe 1985 Marvel Comics commercial.
There are different collectors out there. People who make art, people who sell them, people who just admire them for themselves. I mean, what is it? Profit, for passion, or both?
You know what? I met a guy the other day who just paints on Pokemon cards.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, you can find him on Instagram. He goes by Sukoko Studio. He takes Pokemon cards, and you know how they just have a little rectangle of art where you can see the Pokemon?
Yeah.
He takes that and he basically expands the painting to fill the entire card. This is how he puts it.
Oh, I like that one. That one's sweet.
That's adorable.
Yeah, these later ones definitely goes back to my childhood where I would also stare at my Pokemon cards and just imagine what that world looked like. And I paint on everything. I try to paint on all over my sketchbooks. I just thought, what if I, just expanded the world?
Well, I'm sure that there are many out there that would probably not even think to paint over a Pokemon card.
Yeah, Sue's not painting on a first edition Charizard or anything. Most of the cards he paints on are not worth more than a couple dimes probably. But it doesn't even matter to him anyway because the value of Pokemon cards to him isn't the monetary value but the Pokemon card itself. In fact, to him, a roughed up Pokemon card is more valuable than a mint condition one because a roughed up one has all the stories and the memories attached to it.
Those ones tell more of a story, especially even if they are a little bit damaged, because for me, I want to be able to feel how do I transform it? Do I make it seem as if, the card itself was attacked by a Pokemon? How do I, incorporate that? I want to do more of that.
He also told me about the role of Pokemon in his childhood and why it means so much to him even today.
We were immigrants, so we didn't have a lot of money, so my parents got me 2 packs of Pokemon cards for my birthday. And I remember being a little kid and being they're my pets, so I'd lay them all out and then feed them goldfish crackers. And it's when I talk to people about the Pokemon cards, everybody has stories like that. They all have little things they would, especially because in your childhood, people, they would take their cards with them wherever in the rain and in puddles, and now they're able to kind of relive that.
And I'm sure that there are many people like Sue out there, but maybe not with Pokemon cards. Well, what about comic books? I met this artist a little while back who creates collages out of vintage comic books. He's a collector and an artist.
Oh, really?
Just like Sue. One thing I'm also sure of, though, is that there are a handful of people who would never even consider making art out of their collections. It's a completely different mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
Just like Paul. I met a guy named Paul who works at a collector's store and is an avid comic book collector. He told me that he would never even consider touching his comic books other than admiring them and reading them. To make art, well, he said that's a completely different ballpark.
That's not something I would do, not something I would recommend. To me, that's kind of like debasing the comic. Like, I'm a collector that likes to have his collection complete, like 100%, not with pieces missing and things out of it, right? If I see a comic like that, I wouldn't buy it because it's not for me.
Paul also mentioned that he values the profit he makes from selling his comic books.
Like, okay, this is what I used to do when I was younger. I would buy certain books and I would sell certain books, and then nowadays I look back and what I did back then, and I realized that those were mistakes, because some of the books I sold for like a couple thousand back then are now worth like 40, 50,000. So I'm sitting there going, wow, I sold a book for 2,000 that now is worth over 50,000. I go, and I had a bunch of them. I could retire off of that stuff. I had like 20 copies like that I did, thinking, wow, I made a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there. This is fantastic. Not real.
Paul and Sue are two very different collectors. I mean, one likes to make art and the other one likes to collect and make profit off of his comic books. For me personally, I wouldn't know what I want to do. I mean, I'm not an artist and I'm not a salesman either, so I'm not too sure how I would go about it. For me, when I was younger, whenever I had a collection of something, I wouldn't want anyone to touch it. I would present it really neatly in my room and just kind of admire it from a distance, and then tell people to admire it from even a further distance.
For me personally, I can't justify spending money on something unless I can use it. So if I collect something, like I collect Sanrio things, if I get like a Hello Kitty keychain, I'll put it on my backpack because then I'll actively be using it and I'm actively enjoying it rather than just having it on a shelf somewhere.
And with a collection, at least for me, I wanted to complete it. And so that's what I asked Paul. I asked him what would he do if he collected all the comic books.
I don't think that's ever going to happen because, like you said, not just with the sheer amount of books out there, but just the sheer dollar volume. There's so much stuff out there I want that I can never afford, right? Because there's books out there that's worth millions of dollars, worth more than a house. I'm never going to be able to afford that, right? So
Sue and Paul are different types of collectors, and it's because they have different values. I think Sue as a person values the artistry and the nostalgia, whereas what do you think Paul values more?
I think he values having the pristine collection but also making money off of it. Like he said, he would choose to sell certain comic books and keep others. So I think definitely a part of it is making a profit off of them. I mean, he is a manager at a collection store.
I guess they just represent the different types of collectors there are out there, huh? Because for me, myself, I think I relate to Sue more. I'm definitely not planning to sell my collection, but it's more of a nostalgia and having this that means a lot to me rather than oh, I'm probably going to sell this and make more money later.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an artistic person when it comes to painting or drawing. But if it's a collection that I'm really, really passionate about, I would never consider selling kind of those collectibles. If I came across something that was worth a lot and it didn't mean too much to me, I definitely consider seeing how much money it's worth and maybe giving it to somebody who actually wants it and values it for their own collection.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a bonus. If I were to pass away, I mean, I will eventually, but when I do, it'd be a nice bonus if the stuff that I own actually has some value, and then that would benefit your loved ones, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think they share one commonality though.
Yeah, what is that?
They both regret getting rid of the stuff they had as a kid.
Right.
But maybe for different reasons. Sue wants to be able to paint on his old cards, and Paul, he's thinking about how much his old stuff would be worth today.
Yeah.
But I think we all relate to that. You have that story about your parents giving away your collection.
Well, yeah. I mean, it wasn't just those Tsum Tsums I mentioned. There were so many other retro toys and cards that I had that I really wish I still had today, even if it was like in a box somewhere. Like, it's the nostalgia, it's the meaning behind it, it's a memory to my childhood and probably a lot of people's childhood. So I totally have that regret of my parents giving it away.
Yeah, and I think a lot of kids feel that way, like kids our age, and this is my theory. I think that's why Pokemon is coming back. I think that's why Hello Kitty is coming back, because we had these collections when we were kids and then we don't have them anymore. But now that we've come into, we have access to money and our own free will and whatnot, we can get those things again.
Totally.
This was Tammy Mack
and Lorna Chili. So whatever you decide to do,
you can collect them all,
you can paint them all,
you can sell them all.
The choice is yours.
Everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Teresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane.